For the last 9 months here at the Civilitas Foundation, and specifically as CIVILNET, we have been covering the news. For the last 2 weeks, we've been the news, to be quite frank. Recently, the NSS, the National Security Service of the Republic of Armenia, which was stemmed and born from the KGB, which is the equivalent for an American audience of the FBI or a combination with the CIA, has put us under investigation, and more specifically, the foundation and the founder, former Foreign Minister Vartan Oskanian, who is also currently a member of parliament for the Prosperous Armenia Party. That investigation is a charge or a pending charge, or at least a look into money laundering. The amount is around $2 million, and it stems from a transaction which happened in late 2010 involving the Civilitas Foundation and Mr. Oskanian, and also the Huntsman family, which is an American family who had been doing building projects in Armenia, and at that time had decided to get out, and through that had decided to donate some money to the Civilitas Foundation. So that's sort of a broad overview. My guest today, for full disclosure, is also my employer, Salpi Ghazarian, who is the director of the Civilitas Foundation. Salpi, what happened?
But this wasn't an interview you planned to do before you left. Let me specify two things just to make sure that we're clear. The National Security Service in Armenia has the right to open a criminal case without naming an accused. So in the context of this criminal case that's been filed, Oskanian as well as Civilitas are under investigation. That does not mean that we have been directly accused. However, other than formally, officially, directly accusing us, it sure looks to us like we're the people they're looking at as the potential guilty parties.
Guilty of what?
Guilty of what? The article under which they have opened the criminal case is, in fact, as you said, money laundering. And because money laundering usually emanates from, such terrible security issues like drugs or gun running, this is in the purview of the National Security Service. We, as you may have noticed in the year or so you've been here, don't do drugs or gun running. And so it came as quite a shock to us. And as the questions were asked, it became clear that what they're doing is they first assumed there's a criminal case, that there's some criminal wrongdoing, and now they're working backwards to find some proof of that. And the Armenian expression is the nice, tasty bit that they're focusing on is the donation that John Huntsman, the billionaire, philanthropist, chemical industry king out of Utah, the United States, the donation that was made from Huntsman to the Civilitas Foundation through Vartan Oskanian about 2 years ago. And the story is really, really, really simple, although the process was a little bit complicated. Mr. Huntsman has been in Armenia since the earthquake. He came before most of the major donors that Armenians remember. He built a whole neighborhood in Gyumri. He rebuilt school in Gyumri. He had come several times over the last 22 years. And most of the time, his interlocutor, his formal guide and companion as designated by the government was Mr. Oskanian, foreign minister, deputy foreign minister before that, and so forth. So there was a very warm relationship that developed, and when Mr. Huntsman decided that he wanted out of Armenia because this was no longer a profitable operation, the business part of what he was doing, he wanted to leave the money in Armenia, specifically to Mr. Oskanian, for purposes that are useful, good, charitable, philanthropic for the country, for the development of society.
And at that time, the foundation had been around already for 16 to 18 months or something.
For about a year and a half, that's right. And this whole transaction was really based on trust. Mr. Huntsman trusted Mr. Oskanian, trusted that the Civilitas Foundation would do good work. We had already begun to work with them on some education programs, and so there was a track record there. And Mr. Huntsman trusted us, Mr. Oskanian, and made the donation, which was about $2 million, which came in pieces.
This part is confusing for many people.
This part is confusing, and it's confusing because it took about 4 months. This was an operational company that had a 20-year history in Armenia. And so by the time a buyer was found, by the time it went through all of the tax authorities in order to make sure there were no back taxes, it went through audit and due diligence by the potential buyer. Even the state anti-monopoly commission was asked to take a look at it in order to make sure that there were no other restrictions of any sort. All of this took months. The Huntsman representatives couldn't stay in Armenia for months to make sure this thing had gone through, and so they designated someone responsible, someone who received the shares of the company. Dikran Garabedian, who also is a member of our board. He received the shares for a nominal 1,000 tiram, and then when the processes were all done, due diligence, audit, the whole thing, and the new buyer, the potential buyer, had found the money with which to make the purchase, he purchased it from Dikran Garabedian. Dikran Garabedian, per Huntsman instructions, transferred the funds to Mr. Oskanian for use by the Civilitas Foundation.
But why not directly? Why not directly to the Civilitas Foundation?
I think that at that point, most of it was because Mr. Huntsman had a relationship with Mr. Oskanian. This was a brand new organization, a year and a half old. And basically for matters of trust, that is what he did. It was a fine decision that was made, in our opinion. Mr. Oskanian, who was the founder of the foundation, chairman of the board of the foundation, received the funds, and over the last year and a half, about 1/2 of the total proceeds have already been spent. The other half is in an account that sits there. We draw interest, he transfers the interest, and we do the good work that we thought we'd been doing.
Sure. However, your explanation about being concerned and doing it in that way and dispersing it slowly, it leaves a skeptic or a conspiracy theorist to wonder why you would do it that way and not necessarily buy a story like that. And also it makes someone think that there's potential that when the money is not being looked at, something else could be happening.
I understand skepticism and cynicism. This is a society that has had no reason to trust for many, many years. And I understand all that. All of our activities, including all of our transactions, are transparent. They're electronic transactions. Nobody walks in with a suitcase. Nobody walks out with a suitcase. Our staff doesn't get paid with envelopes of cash. Everything is on the up and up, totally clear. And if anybody over the years had any reason to be skeptical, and that's, perfectly natural, there are plenty of government agencies whose job it is to oversee these processes, to monitor them, to question them, to come in and say, open your books, I'm going to sit here and go through each of them. And that's fine, that's life, that's what government agencies are supposed to do. But in this case, the government didn't do that. The government first assumed this is a criminal activity, filed a criminal case, and then said, hey, let's take a look at your books. And they're doing that drop by drop, day by day, one request one day, another request another day. Of course, we're complying, but of course, we're dumbfounded, upset, frustrated, and cynical ourselves.
This office that we're in is a very nice office. Everyone would tell you that. And we have 50 to 60 employees. And I could tell you also that it's no secret that there have been whispers in the past about where's the money come from. I'm leaving that open. How would you respond to that?
I think that's a typical Armenian question because no relationship in Armenia, financial, economic, business, political, is transparent. Everybody asks that question. In our case, everything we do is transparent. Everybody knows how everybody gets paid. Everybody knows that we spend money when necessary, when people are working till midnight, for example, the elections, on staff lunches and dinners. We pay health insurance. All of that is so transparent that there's nothing wrong with people asking. What is wrong is when people already assume that there is wrongdoing, criminal wrongdoing, before they even listen to the answer. I think that our office is, not just very nice physically, but I think that all of the relationships that we've established between the staff and the leadership, between members of the board and the founder, have been transparent and respectful. There are many things we don't do in this office that other offices seem to think are perfectly fine and acceptable.
For example?
Chasing people around desks, passing money out in envelopes, berating our staff. We don't do that. I think in many ways what has happened here in this public, I guess scuffle is a minor word, but I'll use it anyway.
Yeah, it's the top story, just so everybody knows. We've been the top story for a week.
Absolutely. What has become obvious, I think, is that this is very much a struggle between Soviet and non-Soviet. Nothing we do in this office, in this institution, smells Soviet. And yet, because people look at everything around them with skepticism, with conspiracies built in, they ask us Soviet-type questions like money laundering. You can't have money laundering if the money isn't from a dirty source. Mr. Huntsman's transactions in Armenia for 22 years have been transparent. Mr. Huntsman is the billionaire who fell off the Forbes billionaire list because he gave away so much of his money.
In a previous interview on another media outlet, Mr. Oskanian said, so it's already public knowledge, that our payroll is around $80,000 a month or so.
No, our monthly expenses are $80,000 a month.
Monthly expenses. So if you could sum up, it can be broad, that's no problem, how exactly we pay our bills.
We pay our bills through donations, contributions, partnerships, and grants. We have not just Mr. Huntsman as a donor, Mr. Ernekian, the Argentinian-Armenian businessman, also philanthropist, visionary really, who's taken on only significant infrastructure programs in Armenia, including the railroad, the airport, which everybody sees and understands and appreciates. He too is one of our donors. Our partners, our biggest partners are governments. The government of Poland in our rural development program, the cows that we sell on a microfinance principle, the governments of Germany, Netherlands, the Norway, of course. I'm sure I'm leaving a bunch out. United Kingdom, the very first year. Who else? The U.S. Embassy here in Yerevan. And these partners support us for our projects. We also have individual donors, not a lot of them, but a few very significant and helpful ones. And if this thing goes on much longer, we're not just going to ask people for funds. I suspect we'll find a whole lot of new donors who say, we're fighting the good fight with you.
Okay, so we'll get to later about this potential positive in the end. Let's talk political. I'll try and give background information as best I can. In February, Mr. Oskanian decided to get back involved in politics, to get involved with the Prosperous Party as number 2 on the proportional list. And during the election on May 6th, he did become a parliament member. He also recently, or going back to when he got back into politics in February, has been quite critical of the ruling Republican Party. And there was a specific event on May 4th when there was an explosion involving balloons in the central square, in which the Republican Party continued on with an activity in which he was very critical. That being said, on May 24th, the party, the Prosperous Armenian Party, decided not to join a coalition with the Republican Party, thus dividing power a little bit more than what people may have expected, and this was a big decision. We now know that the investigation was opened on May 25th, one day after that decision was made. Politically speaking, yourself and Mr. Oskanian have been very vocal that you think this is politically motivated. I guess I'll give you an opportunity to elaborate here.
You did a pretty good quick rundown. Let me pick up a few of those pieces. First of all, as you know, we've been very careful about keeping Mr. Oskanian off of our air, only so that people don't say, gee, all of this is something that he created specifically for his own political ends. Because he knows and we know, and I, as someone who loves the media and has lived by media all of my life, know that the best thing you can do with media is to trust your audience, respect your audience, and just give them information in context and let them make up their own mind. Mr. Oskanian became a part of our coverage after he joined politics and Prosperous Armenia Party and so forth. In this particular legal case now, because the accusations are mixed up and presented in such a convoluted way where you don't know where Oskanian starts and Civilitas ends, I now am going to answer your question and answer both halves, where in the past I would have said, you know what, go talk to him, talk to me about Civilitas.
Why have you decided to blend those?
They have decided to blend it, which is why I'm going to blend it. Because in the way in which they've made those accusations, you really don't know, is it Civilitas that they're accusing of mismanagement of funds, which they are. That's what the accusation says. It says Civilitas has violated its own bylaws and the laws of the Republic regarding foundations and so forth. They're not asking, they're not suspecting. They're saying we already have. Based on that, yes, this is political. If it were not, you would ask the questions first, then arrive at the conclusion, and then charge us, fine us, I don't know, something. But you don't first decide we're guilty and then go backwards. And all of this, of course, is happening in the context of the elections, and it's happening, as you said, in the context of several things happening back to back. During the whole election campaign, and even in the run-up to the election campaign, Mr. Oskanian was the only one who actually tried to insert political dialogue, political talk into what should have been a political campaign, as opposed to personal innuendo, insults, curses, and everything else. Do
you think only one is too big of a statement?
I think that if the only one is too big of a statement, I could argue, but let's say the main one. Okay, let's be fair and say the main one. And I think that he succeeded in changing the nature of the conversation. If he was talking about the need for balance of powers earlier, months earlier, with the election and after the election, we discovered that in fact Prosperous Armenia too wanted to maintain a balance of power instead of entering a phony, artificial coalition, to stay out of the coalition and to call its own shots, present its own program, and try to, whenever possible, move the government program in a direction that it thought was right. Will it be able to do it to the extent that it's serious? We'll see. We'll see. But the fact that it was able to do that much even is a problem for the government that needed to demonstrate that it is still a monolithic source of power. The event that you mentioned that came 2 nights, I think, before the election, where the Republican Party rally in Republic Square was thwarted. It wasn't thwarted. Had a big problem because
Tarnished heavily.
Tarnished heavily, thank you. Because balloons that should have been filled with helium and were actually filled with hydrogen blew up.
Which is flammable, helium is not.
Which is flammable, helium is not. Blew up in people's faces, and young people were injured, over 100 of them. Mr. Oskanian was the only one who said, you know what, somebody somewhere has to stop. The President of the Republic should have stopped in the middle of that rally and said, folks, something terrible has happened. We're sorry something terrible has happened. We acknowledge your pain, and then wanted to move on with the rally, was perfectly free to do so. Didn't. Mr. Oskanian was the only one who said, perhaps you should have. The response to that at government levels is equal to the response that we've gotten on all of our statements regarding this case. And that is, instead of dealing with the substance of the request, demand, accusation, charge, he was called, can I say this on the air, a pile of crap?
Yeah.
And it was a charge that the Minister of Education, of all people, repeated on his Facebook page. That kind of response to a political situation, allowed to happen, tolerated by the leadership, not called into question, not rejected, denied, nobody's hand got slapped. What kind of government are we running? What kind of message are we giving to our public? Point 1. Point 2, yesterday, the head of the National Security Service, in an interview, referred to us as mafiosos, basically.
Right, we have the quote, we'll get to it in a second, but yeah.
What kind of a political dialogue is that? What kind of a criminal charge is that? This is the environment in which we live, which is why I have no doubt that this is a criminal process, a political process.
All right, well, in order, I appreciate your answer, but I think you jumped a little bit so that we have to back up so people understand why this comment was made. About 2 weeks ago was the first time you found out this investigation was going on.
June 1.
June 1st. And Mr. Oskanian was called in to give testimony or statements as a witness, which he did.
Which he did. 3
Then
hours worth.
3 hours worth. Then another person connected with the Huntsman family did that.
With the Huntsman Building Products Company here.
Right.
Yes.
Then gave testimony a few days later for about 5 or 6 hours.
Yes.
Then Mr. Oskanian was called in again, and you were also called in.
He went and he said, I will not answer the questions because based on the public announcement that the National Security Service made between his first visit and his second visit, between the first summons really and the second summons, the announcement that the National Security Service clearly said, and that was what I was referring to earlier, that there has been malfeasance, there has been criminal activity, and Oskanian has broken some laws and Civilitas has broken some laws. And he said, well, obviously I'm not a witness, but I'm a suspect, it seems, and he said, you know, reverting to my right by international law, I'm not going to offer testimony. I said the same thing a few days later.
Yeah, you went on Friday as well. You were there for maybe an hour.
That's right.
And you said?
I said the same thing. I said, you've already established in your statement that Civilitas has violated the law, so how can you say I'm a witness? I'm clearly accused of something.
Sure. Okay, so that leads to yesterday where the head of the NSS, whose name is Gorik Hagopian, gave an interview to a news outlet, and when asked about the decisions by yourself and Mr. Oskanian to not testify, he did say, that is your right, but then went on to say, isn't it not strange that the leaders of Civilitas, in quotes, whose mission is to strengthen the civic society in Armenia, instead of supporting the discovery of the truth, choose for themselves a behavior proper of a representative of the mafia. I could leave it open, but I'd rather ask more specifically, getting around the mafia aspect, which is, of course, an accusation, is probably not the best way to handle something. I understand what his point is. He's saying that we are an organization that says we're open to everything, and then you're deciding to not testify.
Well, look, what investigators do the world over is to try to elicit information, sometimes legally, sometimes through pressure, sometimes not legally at all. Everybody does this everywhere. This is not specific to the Armenian National Security Service. On the other hand, I, as a citizen, I, as the head of a public foundation, have every right to expect that my rights are respected. And my right says that if I'm being charged, you have to tell me. You can't pretend I'm something that I'm not. You can't pretend I'm a witness when, in fact, you have publicly said that I have broken laws. So if you can publicly say that, I very sure as hell can say, I'm not answering questions under these circumstances. For the head of the National Security Service to ignore that I have that right as a citizen and to impute to me some sort of mafia activity because I choose to respect the law and he chooses to ignore the law is unacceptable.
Sure, but Salpi, directly, someone who's seeing that might say you're hiding something. What are you hiding?
I'm not hiding anything. Be more transparent than this. If they want information, they should come and ask for information. The government has 55 different agencies between the taxation, the justice ministry, the people that oversee public organizations, whose job it is to ask for information. Ask for it. Don't jump to conclusions. Put pressure on Civilitas because you don't like CIVILNET coverage. Don't put pressure on Oskanian because you don't like his sort of political activity. And then say, oh, gee, Civilitas isn't playing by the rules. The rules have first to be respected by the people in government.
Let's get to the hard politics of this particular event, not past politics, this particular event. We made a decision, Civilitas Foundation made a decision, I didn't make the decision, you made the decision, that after Mr. Oskanian was called in for the second time, you made a decision to go public with the information, which is something that Mr. Hagopian, the head of the NSS, did mention in this interview. Why did you make that decision?
Mr. Hagopian misstated that. He said from the first day Civilitas decided to go public with this, which is not true. I wish we had. We didn't. Mr. Oskanian went for the first investigative session, spent 3 hours, and we assumed that based on that information that somebody somewhere would come to their senses and say, oh gee, we're really barking up the wrong tree. Instead, they called him the second time. At that point, we went public because this is in fact an affront to a public organization and to a public individual. The fundamental problem with politics in Armenia is that the real politics is done behind the scenes, behind the curtains, where the public doesn't see what's going on. We end up watching the theater that has been agreed to by all of the players. We're not playing that game. We aren't doing it through our media. We're not going to do it as an institution. If we have been charged with a crime, someone somewhere needs to say what crime, why we've been charged, and give us the opportunity to actually deal with that issue. The fact is that instead of talking about that publicly, what they're doing is trying to privately pressure us and using all of the media that is controlled by those in power, those near power, whose job it is to manipulate public opinion. They have done everything they can to not just cast aspersions on our reputation, but to actually malign our reputation and to misstate what we do and why we do it. Not acceptable. If they can do that publicly, we sure as hell can.
Do you think the decision surprised them? I guess my question is two parts. One, do you think the decision to go public before they had finished doing whatever it is they were doing surprised them? And two, what do you think their intention actually was?
I do think it surprised them. I think because in many ways at the heart of this thing, as I said earlier, is this tension between Soviet ways of doing things and non-Soviet ways of doing things. We don't do things Soviet ways. And the assumption here is that if power comes out with pressure, that the rest of us have to succumb, ask, see, seek ways around it. We don't need to do that. We don't want to do that. We shouldn't have to do that. We need to be able to publicly say, people, staff, our listeners, our audience, this is what's happening and this is why we think it's happening, and follow us and we'll keep explaining. And you want to ask us questions, by all means ask us questions. Our numbers are transparent, we're out there. So I do think they were surprised by the response. On the other hand, it's part of the process that makes it very difficult for the powers that be to understand who we are and what we're doing. Because CIVILNET too is kind of surprising. Civilitas's public forums are a little bit surprising. We don't just invite the 50 usual suspects, the 50 experts, you know who's going to say what, you know who's going to come and who's not. We invite tens of thousands of people. Anybody who wants to be on our mailing list is invited. Whoever comes, comes. CIVILNET, we do the reports that our reporters and our editors think need to be done. We have what we have. To the extent that the audience likes it, they watch. To the extent that they don't, they don't. We respect our audience, we give them what we can. That process as well is not acceptable and understood. And that's the answer to your second question. That's why.
It's actually fair to say that if not on our side, at least split, public opinion has been in favor of Civilitas a little bit, and it is assumed by most that this is a political type move. So I'm going to ask you some pretty direct questions. Does Mr. Oskanian have motives to get involved even further politically? Is he a potential presidential candidate?
Apparently those in power seem to think he is a potential presidential candidate.
But is he?
Apparently they don't like it. Mr. Oskanian, in all the years that I've known him, is an incremental decision maker. He will make that decision at the time when he thinks is the right decision, both politically and in every other way. At this point, I think if you ask him, he will tell you, I haven't decided, and I believe him. However, really, this has now become a different discussion because those in power believe he will, are afraid he will, and they've taken the public discussion in that direction.
Theoretically, so the public knows, because you are a citizen and you are not protected as Mr. Oskanian is as a member of parliament, theoretically someone could walk through the door right now and take you out of here, correct?
Theoretically, yes, they could.
Right. Mr. Oskanian, that's not the case. They have to go through much more of a process relating to the fact that he's a parliament member, remove his mandate, etc.
They would have to remove the immunity that he has as a member of parliament, and then...
Right. So
why are we going down that road?
How are you doing is my question.
Look, not only am I doing well, but if you can tell, I'm in a fighting mood. Right. And I have to say, you as a good trained journalist said, well, most of the public response is in our direction. I would say that it is amazing, the response that we've gotten. From outside, from inside, from in the country, out of the country, from our staff and from not our staff. Even people who have very comfortably said, look, it's not as if, I've worshipped Mr. Oskanian for 20 years. Or people who say, look, it's not as if CIVILNET is, exactly Athenian. Did Athenians have democracy or journalism? Whatever. It's not as if it's, the be-all and end-all, but at the end of the day, this isn't right. You do not pressure everything that is new and alternative in Armenia. You allow it to breathe. And the reason I'm in a fighting mood and I'm not concerned and worried is because this is coming at a time when not only is the internet a powerful tool, but there are people who are young enough not to know the Soviet ways, not to know they're supposed to be scared, not be dependent on anything and anyone that makes them scared, ready to laugh at this. Our colleagues, they're laughing at this, and that's a good thing, and we're going to keep fighting.
Salpi, thank you so much for joining us. We touched on so many issues, and of course we'll continue to because you are the subject of the investigation at the moment.
It's going to go that long, huh?
Yeah, who knows? I do want to say one thing. There are about 60 people who work in the Civilitas Foundation across multiple projects. The main focus at the moment is media. And I've gotten to know all of them over the past year. And my only concern is that any of their work will be disrupted. I hope that that won't be the case and they continue doing what they're doing, regardless of political motives or involvement. Thank you.